good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for braving the weather and coming today. I just wanted to introduce our book news group this time. This is Matthew Bird. He's a new member of our adult services. And then there's me, Sara. And yeah, I'm getting there. Jake, and yeah, and Maureen. Hi. All right. So we're going to talk about various books, and just like before, we grouped them by theme. I just thought that's easier for you. And our first grouping is the Wild West.
All right, my first selection is The Bullet Swallower, a novel by Elizabeth Gonzalez James. This story, which has the coolest title of any book we're going to talk about today, just want to get that out there, combines Western with magical realism. It's the late 1800s in northern Mexico, and Antonio Sonoro is the most feared bandito on his side of the Rio Bravo. That's what they call the Rio Grande in Mexico. I did not know that before I read this book. Seeking fortune, he and his brother Hugo ride north to Houston to rob a train full of plundered Mexican riches. The botched robbery results in a shootout, which kills the brother, deforms Antonio's face, and earns him a new nickname, El Tragabalas, or the Bullet Swallower. With his feared reputation for taking him, El Tragabalas rides out across Texas to extract his revenge. Fast forward to the 1960s. Antonio's grandson, Jamie, is an actor of the singing cowboy variety and one of the most famous in all of Mexico. His comfortable existence is upended by two new additions to his life. The first is a family history purporting that he comes from a long line of bad men. The second is Remedio, a drifter who possesses what appear to be supernatural powers. Told through alternating chapters, Antonio seeks vengeance while Jamie seeks redemption. The blend of brutal Western with subtle touches of magical realism brings to mind the late Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. But good news for squeamish readers, the level of human cruelty in this book is not even in the same ballpark. But we have that same evocative, gritty setting that makes all the best Westerns so memorable. This one also has a great cast of supporting characters, including a pot-smoking witch doctor Abuelita, a dandy English cowboy, and a house guest who may in fact be Death himself. At the very end, an author's note from the author reveals that much of the book was based on her own family history. Everything in this book is true, except for the stuff I made up, if you guys. How's that for a family story? The Bullet Swallower comes out later this month and will be available from the Glencoe Library.
So my first book is The Trackers by Charles Frazier. You may remember Charles Frazier from his first book, Cold Mountain, which it was his debut, and it went to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. It won, I think, it won the National Book Award, and it was made into a movie that garnered quite a few Oscars for its actors. So this is his newest book, also historical fiction, but this one is set in 1937. Primarily in Wyoming, with flores into Seattle and Central Florida. At this time, America is still reeling from the Great Depression. There are only 4 characters in this book, although Frazier's evocative language allows each place to become a character in itself. We meet a young artist, Val Welch, in the opening pages. Having graduated from college without any job prospects, he is given an opportunity to paint a mural on the wall of a post office in Dawes, Wyoming. He's landed this lucky gig through a former art teacher who now works for the WPA. And just as an aside, the painting that's over the reader's advisor desk was also commissioned by the WPA. 8, so you might want to take a look at it. It's called The Three Artists. The Bullet Swallower comes out later this month and will be available from the Glencoe Library. So anyway, the art teacher knows a wealthy rancher and art collector, John Long, and his much younger wife, Eve. They host Val in a cabin on their property. Then one day, Eve runs off with a small grimoire in tow, and Long recruits Val to find her. So this begins the journey motif that goes through the book. There's great mystery surrounds this couple. They're both outsiders in this small Wyoming community. Long himself comes from a wealthy family in the Northeast. He doesn't get along with his family. And the inheritance he takes, is all this land in Wyoming. No one else wants it. And he takes it. It's like, I don't know, over 100 acres or more. Now, when he was stationed in France, he's a World War I vet, but he was also a sniper. And there he's suave, but there's some really dark elements to him. You don't quite know, but he met Eve at a bar when she was performing with her cowboy band. She had been thrown out of her house by her parents because they had too many mouths to feed. And this, I did some research on this. She became one of 250,000 hobos, teenage hobos, that I had no idea that this was a thing in the Great Depression. In fact, I kind of started looking at it. PBS, they have a documentary series called American Experience. And they did a series, one of them was called Riding the Rails, and you can get it now on Prime. And I started and it was really interesting. So she is one of those teens. She's fortunate in that she has a good singing voice and she's able to get this gig. But when she runs off, Val goes to various places like the Hoovervilles in Seattle. And the descriptions are pretty graphic there and disturbing. Also, he goes into Central Florida. There is humor in it. The characters in Central Florida are in the I don't see historically where they are now and here. But anyway, the fourth main character is Long's head cowboy, Sara. He's an older man with a strong sense of vigilante justice. I don't think the author intended it, but for those of you who ever saw the movie City Slickers, he reminds me of Curly. So just picture Curly in this. Anyway, I really love this book. Loved it. Unlike all his other novels, this one is a noir odyssey, but with an amateur and bumbling sleuth. Frazier, through Dale's quest to find Eve, takes us through the Hoovervilles of Seattle and the swampland of Central Florida, whose characters are straight out of Deliverance. Themes of alienation, societal and individual discontent, fragmented communities, and above all, the impact of the Depression on everyone, but particularly those individuals living on the margins. There are echoes of our present day divides. It may be why Frazier chose to write this book now. Just as an aside, we're going to be discussing this book in full with spoilers with Judy Levin on March 13th at 1 p.m. right in this room. So I encourage you to read it and come to the discussion. It will lend itself to a lot.
Hello. Rounding out our trio of westerns is World Running Down, a dystopian sci-fi western romance from author Hess. The future is here, and for the most part, it sucks. Beyond a few prosperous cities, most live out their lives in bleak, desolate wastelands inhabited by rapacious conmen, brutal pirates, desperados of all stripes, and ordinary people trying their best to survive from one day to the next. Into this scene enters Valentine Weiss, a transgender metal salvager in the deserts of Utah, trying to save enough money to buy his way to citizenship in the utopic city-state of Salt Lake City, where gender transition surgery is free, finding food is a given rather than a struggle, and safety from the ravages of a fallen world is guaranteed. This is more of a dream than a plan for Valentine until he meets Audrey, an AI unit forced to inhabit an android body who offers Valentine a lucrative, hazardous job. Retrieve stolen androids for a less than savory corporation, with the reward of a visa, Salt Lake City. Valentine and Ozark embark on this dangerous mission only to discover that the property they wish to recover does not want to be returned to their cruel, abusive owners. To add even further complications, Valentine and Ozark begin to realize they are falling in love. As World Running Down barrels toward this thrilling climax, Valentine is left with a choice: a life of safety and security obtained at the expense of others, or a life amidst the ruins with his conscience intact. World Running Down manages the balance of telling a thrilling sci-fi adventure yarn that leaves you riveted with a tender, moving love story that pulls at your heartstrings. The author of this book has described it as a kind of cozy version of Mad Max. So that sounds at all appealing to you. I can't recommend World Running Down enough. Thank you.
Is that in paperback?
It's in paperback, yes, and it's available now at the library.
Was it published in?
It's published in paperback, yeah.
And now for something completely different, we turn to mysteries. And Jake might have had the coolest title, but I have the coolest cover. The Christmas Guest. Notice how blood comes off the side of the holly. Okay. This is The Christmas Guest by Peter Swanson, who's one of my favorite mystery writers. His book, The Kind Word Killing, I must have recommended that book like 50 times. It is the creepiest, most wonderful mystery ever. And this is, really good and really short, so I recommend this one too. A former London art student, now living in New York, cleans out her closet on Christmas Eve. She comes across a diary written 30 years ago. Although hesitant to go back to that murderous year, she can't help herself, and she starts reading. When the diary begins, Emma is invited to join a wealthy fellow art student for the Christmas holidays at her family's Cotswold Manor House. Emma writes that she is enchanted by the manor houses, its beauty, its coziness, but what really gets her is the charm of Ashley's handsome, snooty brother, Adam. Adam is moody, Adam is reckless, Adam is under investigation for the murder of his girlfriend. This doesn't stop her. Emma says the charges are ridiculous as Ashley chooses to believe her friend as she crushes harder and harder on Adam. She asks Dear Diary if she's on the verge of a great romance or if she's a character in a gothic tale. Townspeople mention that Emma looks amazingly like the murdered girl. Whatever, she's all in on this. She writes in her diary that she even runs through the forest from the manor house to the pub to see Adam, even though the woods have been home to a mysterious masked stranger who may have indeed been the person who murdered Adam's girlfriend. And then the diary goes blank. It's midway through the book, and the story is turned on its head. To quote the New York Times, the twist will make you rethink everything you read before, and they are right. I wanted to go back and reread parts of the first half of the book to pair it with the second half. And it's just 96 pages. That would be easy to do. You'll devour this snack of a book in a single setting, leaving you hungry for more.
Next up is Paper Cage. Paper Cage is the thrilling debut missing persons mystery from New Zealand writer Tom Baragwanath. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Paper Cage centers on Lorraine Henry, low to her friends and family, especially her darling nephew Bradley, a quiet, unassuming police records clerk in the rural New Zealand town of Masterton. quiet that is, until one by one, Maori children, that's the local indigenous tribe of New Zealand, begin to go missing. The local cops don't seem to care all that much, and before long, it is her own nephew, Bradley, who goes missing. Frustrated by local indifference and terrified for her nephew, Lowe teams up with Detective Justin Hayes, a cop from the big city, Wellington, sent to investigate the disappearances, who is as frustrated with Masterton's Keystone cops as she is to solve the mystery. In doing so, they uncover a dark underbelly to rustic, small-town New Zealand, where the tourists might see a scenic pastoral paradise. Lowe and Justin find a community plagued by drugs, poverty, and racism. Exactly the type of place where children go missing and very few would care. Hidden Cave is certainly a thrilling mystery. I should know, I read it completely in one sitting, I couldn't put it down. Very, very compelling. But I would not call it a typical thriller. It's more of a social thriller. It's just concerned with the socio-cultural dynamics of rural New Zealand, as it is with the ins and outs of the whodunit mystery at its core. The book is definitely accessible if you're not intimately familiar with New Zealand history and culture, but having Google open while reading it to look up certain Maori words or certain events in New Zealand history will probably add to your enjoyment. If this antipodean thriller sounds at all appealing, it'll be coming to the library February 13th in Hartford.
Next is Rabbit Hole by Kate Brody. It's already one of this year's buzziest books. My husband works in a high-rise downtown, and the elevator has one of these TV screens, and he was watching an interview with the author this week, and he came home and he saw this on the coffee table. He goes, "How cool are you? You've got that book." It centers on obsession, crime, and a dysfunctional family. Oh, first off, I don't read sad. I read creepy, and this is really well done creepy. Okay. The main character is a young woman who takes over from her father in trying to find out where her older sister went to or what happened to her 10 years ago. Teddy was only 16 when her sister Angie disappeared. Teddy lost not only her sister that day, but also her father in a way. He became obsessed, consumed with trying to find her, long after it became a cold case. To ease his pain, he turned to drinking and drug use. He went down the rabbit hole of the internet, particularly on the site Reddit, as he chased possible leads. But on the 10th anniversary of Angie's disappearance, he drove his car off the side of a bridge to his own watery grave. That's when Teddy takes over the search. And basically, okay, we're only on about page 6.
Wow.
She soon becomes obsessed with online searching, with meeting up with people who helped her dad or who knew her sister. One is a college student who looks a lot like Angie, she would do research for her father. Another is a man who knew her sister and comes to know Teddy in a biblical way. Teddy gives in to paranoia. She loses her moral compass. She badgers relatives she hasn't seen in a decade. She wonders if her father might have had something to do with her sister's disappearance. She questions her own memories of what happened the night Angie disappeared. This twisting mystery is really well written. It's the tale of a woman unraveling. It will appeal to fans of Gillian Flynn and Leanne Moriarty. I'm sure it's going to be on Reese Witherspoon's list. It'd be great for book clubs, not literary fiction book clubs, but just, can't read it fast enough book clubs.
So, that was a good segue into literary fiction, which I tend to like. The Half Moon is the first book, and it also has a mystery component, not like yours, though. Not such a scary mystery component, but anyway. I don't. Sorry. So you may be familiar with Mary Beth Keane from her earlier novel, Ask Again, Yes. Like the Trackers, the Half Moon is set in a small town, but with a very contemporary setting. The book covers just 1 week, but through flashbacks, and we see the history of Jess and Malcolm. Malcolm has worked in a New Jersey bar since he was 18. He's now in his mid-40s, and he has an opportunity to buy this bar from a rather shady character, Hugh. He's gotten, but this bar needs a lot of work, more work than he can really afford. Financial woes, infertility, and secrets work to pull Malcolm and Jess apart. Although the book is set in 1 week, through flashbacks, you get their whole history. Whereas the Trackers is painted with a broad stroke and the characters feel small in comparison to the grandeur of the Rockies, the Half Moon conveys interiority. The snowstorm, the packed bar, a cramped home, these make up the setting of this novel. This is a very character-driven novel that highlights a marriage over a long period of time and how events, especially secrets, can erode the love two people feel toward each other. There's a mystery component in this novel, along with some surprises you won't see coming. If you're looking for a read that's a little lighter, I would recommend this. It was a good book, and I enjoyed it. The second book, very different, is Absolution by Alice McDermott. This is her newest book. Love the book. She attributed Graham Greene's The Quiet American with inspiring this work of historical fiction. Graham Greene's novel, The Quiet American, was published around 1956. Greene was prescient in seeing the folly of our involvement in the Vietnamese conflict. This book, the backdrop is 1963, just before our major involvement in Vietnam in 1965. But whereas Greene was very male-centered, Alice McDermott focuses on the wives of the young advisors recruited to Vietnam. Using a faux epistolary technique to drive the narrative, Absolution tackles big philosophical questions involving intentions and results. McDermott asks the reader if good works matter in the face of overwhelming suffering, or whether the impulse to alleviate pain is inconsequential. This is a major, Alice McDermott is a devout Catholic, and that's very important in understanding all of her books. And she's tackling a lot of theological questions. For example, the title of this book, Absolution, is that part of the sacrament of confession in which the priest says, you are forgiven, right, in the name of Christ. And I was listening just before we got together now, I was listening to an interview of Alice McDermott with the Monsignor, because my background is not Catholic, and I like to go really deep when I read. And so I thought, okay, now I've got an interview that might really help me. And he was talking about how difficult a concept absolution is, because it's easy, relatively easy for a priest to say, after you admit to a sin, that you are forgiven. But the difficulty is for that person with a conscience to forgive themselves, as well as to forgive other people who might be in their sphere, who perhaps unintentionally have hurt them. It's a similar concept in Judaism too, the concept of forgiveness. So given the backdrop of Vietnam, in which this country made huge mistakes, What Alice McDermott, I think, is saying is you have to understand the context of where we all were at that time. And, you know, now with the hindsight of 2020 vision, we can see all those things. But communism was a thing that we thought was really evil. And there were the CIA, a lot of these engineers, like the two major central figures are two women in this book. Their husbands are both engineers. The main speaker is looking, she, as a co-epistolary, she's writing this. And she realizes now, as she's in her 60s, that those really weren't engineers, they were CIA. I forget the Secretary of Defense at that time, but he was Catholic, and he like enlisted a lot of very promising Catholic boys from really good schools to come and be, you know, under the guise of engineers and advisors. They were working for the CIA, now known as Catholic, oh God, I forget, but it, Catholics in Action. Yeah, yeah,
Catholics
Catholics in Action, right, right. And these were an elite group of young men. The wives had no idea what they were really up to. And she shows a lot of the sex roles, the gender roles at that time. For example, if you remember when Jackie Bouvier Kennedy, when she lost her child, Patrick, she was the last to know. The press knew. There was a question, and does Mrs. Kennedy know that she lost her son? No, we haven't told her yet. I mean, it's shocking, but yes, just as women wore girdles, it's 100 degrees in Vietnam. They were in their stockings and girdles. There were all these cocktail parties that were happening at that time. She paints a fascinating picture of Vietnam and the women who were supporting their husbands in Vietnam at that time. She also examines, for example, one of the characters wants to go to a leper colony to try to help, and there's a foil, one of the officers' husbands saying, well, what are you doing? You're going to make no impact whatsoever. They're going to die a horrible death anyway. But she felt we should give them nice clothes, to make nice clothes, to bring a little joy, a little laughter. This is throughout the book, that question of, does it matter? How much impact can you do when there's so much suffering around you? It's a small book. It would be great for a book club discussion. I plan to ask Judy Levin if she would do this book too, because I think it's really good.
When does it come out?
It is out.
Is
It's out now. Yes, it's out. This is my own copy.
Robert McNair.
Yeah.
I right this there.
Right, McNair. Thank you
Yeah.
for looking it up. Yeah.
Okay, I have a nonfiction book here. Brush Aside, The Untold Story of Women in Art by Noah Charney. This book, which is in the library's Pecos collection, is a gallop through centuries of art, highlighting female members of the art world who have been rarely given the opportunity to shine. We're not talking obviously about Frida Kahlo or Mary Cassatt or Georgia O'Keeffe, women painters who have long been on illuminated pedestals. We're talking about such female artists as Ukrainian-born Janet Sobel, the rightful inventor, the author claims, of drip painting. Sobel's first painting in this style preceded Jackson Pollock's invention of it 2 years earlier. let's see. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is her Milky Way. And this is his galaxy. We came out 2 years later and he said, oh, this just ended. Although Sobel did gain success, she had a solo show at the Guggenheim. She receded from view quickly by moving from the hub of the art world, New York City, to not just New Jersey, but rural New Jersey, where her husband had a costume jewelry factory, and where she, a non-driver, was pretty well stuck. Another little remembered artist who worked in Paris for the first 4 decades of the 20th century is Welsh-born Gwen John. Though primarily a painter, she also served as a model. She was a model for Rodin, who was 35 years her senior. Surprise, they had an affair. But he broke it off, and then she stalked him. She sent him thousands of letters. She was shunned by her contemporaries for her obsession, but at least she didn't live in rural New Jersey. To quote Booklist, in addition to crisp color illustrations, there is, quote, much more to appreciate in this unusually inclusive and expert celebration of women in the arts.
My final book, and my favorite book, like editorialized, is Freedom's Dominion, Saga of White Resistance to Federal Power by the historian Jefferson Cowie. It is the winner of the 2023 Pulitzer Prize for History and has been reissued in beautiful paperback that just came out last week. Cowie is a historian at Vanderbilt University and is one of the preeminent scholars of American history working today. His previous titles have included the magisterial Staying Alive, a history of American working class life and culture in the 1970s, and The Great Exception, a revelatory look at the New Deal's place in American life. With Freedom's Dominion, Cowie chronicles what he argues is one of the most long-running and consequential conflicts in American history. Struggle between citizens influenced by white supremacist ideals, for whom the concept of American freedom primarily means the freedom to dominate and subjugate others. And the federal government, which belatedly and meekly has tried to enforce the Constitution's prescription of nominal equality among all citizens. Cowie traces this conflict by recounting the history of a small rural Alabama county along the Alabama-Georgia border, Barber County, illuminating 4 main episodes in that county's history which highlight the struggle. Indian removal, where white settlers fought for the rights to displace Native Americans and steal their land against a federal government which tried in vain to abide by treaties it had signed with local tribes. The Civil War and Reconstruction, where white citizens unsuccessfully opposed the effort to abolish slavery, but successfully defeated federal attempts to secure political and economic equality for newly freed African American citizens. The New Deal, with the planter class defamed federal attempts to regulate the economy in a more equitable fashion, with appeals to racial prejudice. And finally, the Civil Rights era, where the most famous native son of Barber County, former Alabama Governor George Wallace, spearheaded the effort to resist the federal government's dismantling of the Jim Crow order. If anything could sum up the argument of Cowie's book, he makes the point that in Wallace's famous segregation now, segregation forever speech, he mentions the word segregation 3 times. He mentions the word freedom 25 times. And so this sort of perverse view of freedom is Cowie's subject. He's an accessible, literary-minded writer, which is a trait often lacking among academic historians, I'm sad to say. And with Freedom's Dominion, he provides a fresh look at some of the most elemental, if shameful, themes in American history. He gives any discerning reader much to think about and chew on. The paperback version is out now and is available at the library if you want to check it out. Thank you.
All right. And my first nonfiction selection is Rental Person Who Does Nothing. A memoir written by Shoji Morimoto and translated from the Japanese by Don Nodding. This curious memoir chronicles the experience of a man who provides the service of his mere presence and what that means for his clients. Shoji Morimoto was feeling burnt out by his freelance writing job and a boss who was constantly telling him things like, it makes no difference if you're here or not. Morimoto must have taken that as a challenge, because on one fateful day in 2018, he went on Twitter to announce that he was going to start a service where people could hire him to do nothing. For the price of transportation to and from his destination, plus any additional expenses incurred, clients could use his service. That would entail simply being there and offering some non-committal, non-judgmental conversation if prompted. Much to his surprise, and maybe your surprise too, the request came rolling in. He's been hired over 4,000 times and is a bit of a minor celebrity in Tokyo where he lives. So just who would hire a person to do nothing and why? Lots of people for lots of reasons, it turns out. There are people who want to try a new restaurant or cafe, but would feel awkward going alone. There are people who work from home or just need to tidy up the apartment and just do better when there's another body in the room with them. Other requests are more personal in nature. One woman was moving away from Tokyo. She hired the rental person to stand at a train platform and just wave as the train pulled away, so somebody would be there to say goodbye to her. Another woman hired him to come along with her while she signed her divorce papers and then went out for lunch afterwards. She said she wanted it to be a interesting memory rather than a sad one when she looked back on it. All of these examples and many more in the book show us the value that a single person can create, not through their labor, but just through their presence. So as you can see, it's a very skinny book, but it offers a lot to think about. You can read it as a memoir of one man leaving the rat race to live life on his own terms. Or you can read it as a sort of economic treatise of a value, the value created by one person. Or even just a feel-good story about all the people whose lives were improved by having someone to exist alongside, even if it's just for a little bit. Rental Person Who Does Nothing came out last week and is available from the Glencoe Library. And to finish things off is The Allure of the Multiverse, Extra Dimensions, Other Worlds, and Parallel Universes, written by science writer and physicist Paul Halpern. He uses scientific history and the latest research to explore the concept of the multiverse, one of the most exciting and elusive ideas in contemporary physics. Imagine a world where things turned out differently. It could be as insignificant as you choosing to have tea with breakfast this morning instead of coffee, or it could be as major as these major events in world history having completely different outcomes. This sort of thing used to be the realm of philosophers, theologians, and poets. But in the 1920s, the new field of quantum mechanics ushered in new ways of thinking about the universe by theorizing at the smallest possible scales. By the 1950s, Princeton graduate student Hugh Everett theorized that quantum experiments could split the universe into different branching paths. Scientists conduct an experiment, and outcome A happens, they just continue, but the act of that experimentation, he theorized, could create a parallel, simultaneous, invisible universe where outcome B happens and continues therefore. By the 1970s, this idea had new followers and a new name, the many worlds interpretation. Perhaps unsurprisingly, physicists are divided on this theory. Science is all about observation and experimentation after all, and how are you supposed to observe and experiment upon that which is imperceptible? Nevertheless, believers in the theory continue to calculate and theorize. In the meantime, the many worlds interpretation has captured the public imagination. Multiverses and parallel universes factor into dozens of sci-fi works, including movies, books, comics, and TV shows. Halpern's book unites all these aspects, the philosophical, the pop culture, and hard science, and there is a lot of hard science in this, into one tidy package. So maybe you've read books by scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Carlo Rovelli, and you're hungry for more. Or maybe you watched Oppenheimer, and you want to know what all those physicists were up to during peacetime. Or maybe you watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, and you're left wondering just how possible wildly different versions of your own life actually are. If that sounds like you, take the plunge into The Allure of the Multiverse. It comes out this week and will be available from the Glencoe Library. And that does it. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience. And